Michael Jordan. In, I think, 91, he was definitely the best player in the world, best scorer, etc. But he hadn't won a single championship. And when the Chicago Bulls hired the new coach, Phil Jackson, he came with a triangle offense, which is a very organized way of attacking the opposite basket. And if you don't have that organized chaos, you're just a bull in a china shop, right? And you can't sell broken china.
We often glorify speed. We celebrate launches, fundraising, and exponential growth graphs. But speed without direction is just a noise, and chaos eventually becomes a debt you cannot pay back. My guest today argues that execution is not just a task list, it's an architecture. Raphael, welcome to Think Act Lead.
Hi, Stephane. Thanks for having me.
So let's be honest. There is a kind of intoxication in hypergrowth. It feels powerful. At what precise moment did you realize that the very speed driving your growth was becoming your biggest systemic risk? And what was your wake-up call?
So I started my career, and I think we need to take a few steps back. I started my career working in an agency where, you have to, it's always go, go, go. You have to fight for client satisfaction. Mistakes are pretty cheap. They're expected. They're fixed easily. And you have always this concept of pain of growth and chaos. So it's just without thinking, you just move forward, right? And then a few months after I joined that agency, it was acquired by Accenture, which is a huge corporate, a big machine, heavy processes. The clients actually come to you because of the brand name. And as opposed to the agency, the mistakes are costly. You're not really allowed to make mistakes, otherwise you're going to lose that client because they're going to go somewhere else, right? So it's a company that is much slower, overly structured in some aspects. But the more organized your delivery is, the more lengthy the engagement is, and the more money you bring, right? So it still brings growth thanks to structure. And that wake up call for me was this acquisition. I started the career with the mindset that in an environment where it was I had to go and get what I wanted. But here I was, 500,000 people company and a machine. It was still about growth. It was just a different kind of growth, the growth of a giant, slowly but surely. And for that, and thanks to that, I understood that I needed to find the best of both worlds, go fast when I needed, but also take a deep breath in some other time, because structure gives you applicable, scalable way of delivering, predictable way of delivering, which makes you fast if you want to be fast. So in essence, you had to be structured to go fast, if that makes sense. And that's really when I learned that, hypergrowth is great, but slow growth is better.
Yeah, it makes sense. Sometimes slow growth is more sustainable, especially in the long run. When does breaking things stop being a strategy and start being a liability?
I think it's a strategy when you're a startup that needs to know product market fit. If we take the example of starting a business, you need to go fast, and quality is almost less important than finding out whether your idea is good and has customers. Because if your idea is shit, then you're never going to sell and your startup is going to crumble, right? It becomes a liability when you need to keep your paying customers, because customers stay for the quality of your product and the quality of the service that you give, right? So product market fit is great, but what pays for salaries, put food on the table is recurring paying customer. That means that one needs to be able to shift quickly from complete chaos to organized chaos. It doesn't have to be everything is, structured and fits perfectly within boxes, but organized chaos is good in a sense that you're able to deliver, you're able to keep your flexibility, which is critical in the case of a startup. But otherwise, if you don't have that organized chaos, you're just a bull in a china shop, right? And you can't sell broken china.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Also, you talk about architecture. If you were to draw the blueprint of your execution engine today, what are the three load-bearing pillars that cannot be removed without the system collapsing?
You have time for that answer? I think the word blueprint is a little misleading. because that would mean that there's a universal solution, universal blueprint for that works everywhere. Each company is different, has a different structure, different culture, and you need to evaluate all of that before you can really actually structure that. That's the way you deliver, right? So if we take the example of an architect, I'm guessing I didn't go to architecture school, but I'm guessing there's rules and best practices and techniques and styles that you learn in school. But when you get to a new building, you assess, I don't know, the orientation, where the sun is going to set, where the context of the land, where the contractors are going to, set their truck, and all of that. So you adapt to your environment, right? So for me, the first, I would say, the most important pillar is the people. Whatever system you want to implement, they're going to be the ones that are actually living by those principles and carry that system, right? You need to understand how they think, how they work, their culture, their motivation, their ambition, design, adapt a system to that context. For example, it might sound cliche, but I personally truly hire for mindset and potential, at least for junior people, because the rest I think can be taught. There's this one guy I hired once. He wasn't really qualified for the role. He had some experience, but it wasn't a perfect fit. But I had come up with a kind of unusual hiring process. He really went for it. He really embraced it and delivered actually something that was really cool. And when we kind of discussed, there was a fit, personality fit, right? It was funny because after a week, someone in the leadership told me I should fire him because he wasn't truly qualified, but also he kind of fell asleep in the open space during work hours. So everybody was like, "Why did you hire this guy?" And for me, I stuck with him because it was about the people, it was about the person, right? And as far as I know, I mean, I know he's still in the company and he did great things. So I mean, I guess that it worked. Of course, it's not going to always work, but this person was fitting into the context that we were trying to establish, and that's why I think for me it was a success. To get back to your question, the second pillar, so the first pillar is people. The second pillar is really adaptability. The architect, the guy that is leading, or the guy or the girl who's leading this whole machine, needs to adapt to the context and not the other way around. Like I said at the beginning, you can't come in with your big feet and say this is how it's going to be. You have to adapt to the culture of the company, the way people work, because unless it's a startup, you're not starting from scratch, and you have to be the one that adapts, right? If you're too rigid, that's not going to work. If you're too loose, people are going to be like, who's this guy? And they're not going to take you seriously, right? That example for me, it kind of resonates because a few years ago, I had a restaurant and I came from with zero experience in hospitality. And I came in with my kind of management consulting background and said, oh, we could probably adapt and streamline the way operations work in the kitchen. Kind of like a factory, what you read in books and business school and all that. But there are rules in the kitchen that you have to follow, hygiene and whatnot. So you can't just come in and say, oh, you should do this, you should do that. You need to learn, you need to adapt to the environment and then apply what you can and kind of select what makes sense and what doesn't. You can have great general ideas, but you have to adapt to the reality of the ground. And last but not least, as far as the pillars, the goal is always growth. It can be growth of the company, but for me, it's also growth in my personal role and growth for my people as well. And that means learning new things, growth in the scope of work and what you do on a daily basis. So it means the systems has to be scalable. It needs to adapt to change, not only to the context when you get in, but also to change, because you need to be ambitious. You need to think of a system that works for one, but that can be applicable to 10, 100, 1,000 people. If you take a startup, for example, you usually start at one. It's usually complete chaos. But like I said at the beginning, you need to deliver, right? Whatever the cost. And then you need to switch to that organized chaos when there's one person, then three persons, reorganize the roles and responsibilities, who's doing what. So organize, orchestrate all of this so that you keep growing, company keeps growing, and overall the operations keeps growing.
Okay. I really like now the fact, how do you embed, I would say, scaling inside core of your approach? I think this is something very important when we want to move from chaos to a more structured organization or company. So now I have a question for you. How do you standardize without bureaucratizing? how do you build rails for the train without killing the agility that you got here in the first place?
So it's a fine balance, right? It comes down to developing habits, I think, and a culture rather than just sticking to documenting processes. I mean, if we look at going to the gym, for example, you can even know with ChatGPT, you can create your own workouts and whatever. You can track every rep that you want on your smartwatch, but the results come from actually showing up regularly,
Hmm.
consistently. For me, it's the same at work. Same example also with investments. Boring, recurring investments usually beat stock picking. Usually, sometimes you're lucky, but usually. If we get back to the corporate world, I would say as you grow, there's there's challenges that tend to raise, but that's part of this pain of growth I was mentioning, and also part of the adaptability that I was mentioning as far as the architecture. If your culture from the get-go is to adapt, you will adapt naturally, right? Without adding useless paperwork in the process. I talked about Accenture before. When you work in a huge company, you tend to have switched way too far in the process, and you have to document everything. You have to keep track of everything. So that's why I said at the beginning, you need to find the balance, right? And for me, speaking of documenting processes, there's one interesting challenge, and I call it interesting because I don't know whether we've as a group, as a society, let's say, we've really fixed it, but it's a challenge that comes with scale, and that's organizational knowledge. How do you make sure that a new joiner in a 200 or 2,000 people company has the same onboarding experience and ends up with the same knowledge than someone that is joining a 20 people company where the knowledge is much more concentrated, right? So for me, knowledge management is really an underrated investment for companies because it is a cost. It looks like a cost, behaves like a cost, so probably it is a cost, but it is really hard and tedious to maintain. I consider it to be the glue that holds the entire system together. And it should be really looked at very seriously if you want to grow and grow fast. One perfect contemporary example is AI. We hear every day that AI is going to take our job, right? But do you know what AI needs the most outside of computing power? It's knowledge, structured knowledge. It's a way for it to learn and to know where to find the information. And because that changes every day, it needs to be maintained over and over and over again. But it's the same for people. We need to know where the knowledge is. We always have this person that knows everything that you always go back to ask, "Hey, how do I do this? How do I do that? Who do you know can help me with this?" But these people can become bottleneck. And when we were talking earlier about it's always about growth, personal growth, company growth, etc. If that person doesn't centralize their knowledge somewhere that can be consulted by AI or by people, it will always remain the person that know that, but nothing else. They can't expand because their focus is on what they know today, right? Or at least that's the risk. Some people are managed to always expand their knowledge. I don't know how they do it, you know. So in essence, and to get back to the earlier point, for me, without knowledge management, I don't think we can grow.
You rightly pointed out that knowledge management is kind of invisible glue. So how is your advice for a CEO or for a head of department which are looking to scale to manage this point? Because this point for me bring kind of tension between short-term and long-term goal. In short term, you might, for example, willing to achieve your sales target for the next month. But in the long run, you want to have, for example, you want to reduce your operational cost by next. So what is for you the two or maybe three advice you want to give to a CEO, especially on the knowledge management?
That's a tough question because, like I said earlier, I don't know that we've fixed it and we've found the solution. I mean, I'll be conservative a little bit at the beginning and say it depends on the company, but I have a few options in mind, at least. Um, One, let's say the CEO is probably, I mean, depends on the size of the company, but let's assume it's a
Of course.
startup. A CEO or head of department of a small department. I think the best way, I don't know if it's the best way, but a way to do it is to have the right people under you so that you can delegate the day to day and you can focus on knowledge management at the beginning. Why I'm saying this? Because most likely you are the person who holds most of the knowledge, if not all of it. So you're the one who needs to take the first step and kind of dump your brain on a platform. Doesn't really matter which platform. You're probably going to change at least 3 times the tool that you're using for knowledge management, but just dump it somewhere. Write it down. It doesn't have to be super well written at the beginning. Just put ideas, bullet points, etc. Then you can, build as you go. It's a living organism, knowledge management. One day you're gonna have motivation to do 20 pages. One day you're gonna be like, I don't want to do this, and drop 2 bullet points. That's okay. As long as you do it consistently and regularly, that's fine. The second option thing that I would investigate is AI. As long as you're not working in a highly regulated industry, you should be able to use standard ChatGPT, Claude, whatever, to drop that knowledge somewhere and it will organize it for you, so that it helps you. Yeah, right now those are the only 2 ideas I have. But it's going back to the earlier point. It's really about for you to take the first step and to start doing it. It doesn't matter how well it's done at the beginning. Over time, it will evolve. You will learn what works for you, what works for your people. Do they understand what you mean? Do you need to go deeper? Do you need to link to somewhere else? All of this is going to come as you go, but you just have to start doing it.
I'm fully agree with you, Raphael. This is not an easy answer. But what do you think about to follow up your processes? Because you mentioned that sometimes the most knowledgeable person is becoming a bottleneck. So, right? So I think that some way we need to also check how our processes can be optimized and how can we improve it, because if we have some limitation based on the knowledge of some people, we need to be able to identify this and also to transfer this knowledge to another person in the team.
For sure, for sure. It's funny because it makes me think of an interaction I had this week with someone who told me, "Oh, but this is the rules and this is our processes and this is how it works." And I was like, "Yeah, but you can see that it's preventing us from doing what we're trying to do. So maybe we need to look at our processes." And the answer was just staring blank, like blank staring at me without a response. I think it's the job of the knowledge manager to do that. It's always questioning whether that process, that rule, the way we do things is the appropriate way. And again, I keep referring back to AI and the pace at which everything changes on an almost daily basis. What is true today is most likely not going to be true tomorrow because there's going to be a easier, faster, better way to do something. So yeah, definitely that part of the knowledge management and why it's hard because you need to maintain it. And nowadays you need to maintain it even faster than before is that it changes every day.
How do you transition your team mindset from hero mode to system mode? And how do you tell a high performer that following the process is now more important than their individual improvisation?
Wouldn't say following the system is more important than improvisation. Um, it's just a different way of approaching work. I mean, as you asked the question, there's a couple of things that came to mind. In that agency I mentioned at the beginning, we redid the entire office, and on the wall there was a quote. I don't even know who the quote is from. That said, "If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together." And for me, that's kind of the mindset shift that needs to happen. I like football a lot, um, and sports in general. So I usually, with my teams, I use a lot of sports analogy to kind of make a point. And you have those dogmatic coaches who believe in specific rigid systems that will lead them to victory. And sometimes it does. If you take Mourinho, for example, he won by being very organized and very strict. But for me, I would argue that the most successful coaches in modern times, in the past 20 years maybe, all had a form of organized chaos on the pitch. They had a system, but they had players, good players in general, that were very free to adapt not only to the form of the day, but also, and more importantly, to the opposite team. within that system. So they stayed within that organized chaos that I mentioned at the beginning, but they were free to get creative and to find solutions themselves. And speaking of sports, there's another analogy that comes to mind, and an example is Michael Jordan. In I think 91, he was definitely the best player in the world, best scorer, etc. But he hadn't won a single championship. And when the Chicago Bulls, hired the new coach, Phil Jackson, he came with a triangle offense, which is a very organized way of attacking the opposite back. And it focuses on finding the best player and that has the most space on the pitch. Reason being, if they have the most space, they have the most freedom to score, right? And he actually told Michael Jordan, "You can be the best scorer in the world, but you're never going to win. I need you to help your players help your teammates be better, and find them in the right position so it's easier for them to score." So he brought that mindset change, and the rest is history. Michael Jordan is arguably the best player ever, and at least in my opinion. But if we bring that back to a corporate world, the highest performer is not just someone who follows a system. They're the ones that will have the ideas, the drive that are different from the mass, from regular team players, let's say. So you shouldn't limit that creativity. You shouldn't tell them, no, no, don't be a hero. We're a team now and you need to fit within that system. We're a team, but do your thing and bring us extra. So leadership for me is not telling people how to behave. It's to get the best out of them, to adapt to them and find the right system so that they can be the hero within that team.
Okay, so that means in your management style, especially in a scaling process, you ask your different, I would say, players, teammates, to be more inclusive and to adapt to the strengths of other people.
For sure. Yeah, because you can't, and also to learn how to delegate. I think it's one key element for myself, but for everyone, right? Because to address the bottleneck issue, people become bottleneck when they don't delegate, right? And when they're not able to delegate. Not able to delegate because they don't want to or they can't.
I want to touch on something personal regarding your leadership style. In the startup ecosystem, we often glorify leadership with loudness. We tend to expect the charismatic general rallying the troops with big speeches. But you have different frequencies. You are more analytical, perhaps more introverted. So for me, you are kind of quiet architect. Do you believe that silence is actually a prerequisite for high-level execution? And practically, how do you command authority in a chaotic room without ever raising your voice?
Yeah, I like to listen and observe first, whether it's personal life or professional. And I try to speak when I have something to say. And when I think it's interesting, which is not always the case, which is why usually I prefer to say silence. Is silence a prerequisite? I don't know. I think there's many ways to lead. Of course, I have my opinion, my style. And do I think some ways to lead are better than others? As far as your point on authority, I think it should be earned. But in my career, I was actually told by a coach that true leadership is through inspiration. And I think it's somewhat true. It's at least what you're going to find in a lot of leadership books. But I also think that not everyone can be Nelson Mandela or Barack. Not everyone has that charisma and that presence, and not everyone has that oratory talent. But for regular people like me, I would say the first step is to lead by example, is to put in the work, show up when you're needed, when your people need you, and live by the standards of the system that you want to implement. Kind of walk the talk if you want, because if you ask something of your people you're not actually willing to do yourself, you're not a leader, you're just a dictator. And for me, that's not a leadership style I want. I know it exists, but it's not mine. So for me, you command authority by leading by example. And then after that, you can inspire if you have that oral fiber of the great people I quoted.
So in this new architecture of execution, how has your own definition of leadership changed? And how do you do less of today compared to 2 years ago?
I would say long hours. Um, and that's the beauty of a working system. You can do more in less time. I know it's going to be controversial, especially with the younger generation, but I want to be very clear. Any young graduate or a junior person should do long hours, go the extra mile, learn as much as possible, because and over deliver, because for me that's how you move up, that's how you learn your craft and become indispensable. Of course, people are saying, yeah, you're never indispensable and companies will fire you like this. True, but at least you tried, and at least you made it harder for people to fire you if you unfortunately getting fired. But going back to long hours, it might not pay off immediately, but that's, in my opinion, the best professional investment you can make. I know now we talk a lot about work-life balance and having boundaries, etc. That's great, but I think you need to earn it, and that's the shift I'm talking about. Before, I was doing long hours. I was working very early, 6 7 a.m. in the office until however long I needed. But now that I have this system that works personally, and then I had some success implementing those systems in companies, I'm actually known for leaving early. It's not because I don't work. I might sound cocky, but I think I deliver more than the average person, but I just do it faster because of that system. So that changed the way I work, but that also changed the way, or it made my leadership style evolve. I adapted. Going back to the pillars we talked about earlier, adaptability. I adapted to post-COVID work realities. Before it was mostly in person, and now it's more remote, but it's also an evolving approach to work as well. So yeah, I think it's critical to have work-life boundaries, for example. And I love my job. I think about new things, new ideas all the time. I send myself emails to have a reminder in my mailbox in the morning when I think of something in the shower. But for one, I don't expect everyone to be like that. I completely understand that some people work for necessities. So again, it's about adaptability, understanding what drives your people, but also to the point of evolving leadership, it's knowing that the way you work is not the way everyone works. And second, going back to the point, leading by example, if I openly work long hours, my people will believe they need to work long hours too if I don't say anything. That's, I would say, natural, at least at the beginning. They might not do it, but they will think they should. And that's not necessarily good. That's good if they have the same drive and the same way to approach work, but that's not good if you don't address it, if for example, for them is quote unquote just a job. The reality is that any system I put in place is designed for us to work smarter, not longer. Might not be the case at the beginning because, for example, if you document all of the knowledge, etc., that's going to take forever. But once it's done, it's not something that is remaining. So if we can leave early with the satisfaction of a job well done, then that means the system works. In all honesty, at the beginning, it's more of a mental trick because, like I said, no system works great from the get-go. But it's more about the culture we implement. Like you said earlier, we talked about short-term versus long-term. Over time, we all work towards the same goal, and therefore we achieve it. So it's positive reinforcement and, like self-team motivation, where that's our target. If we keep repeating, we're going to reach it. We're going to reach it together.
So Raphael, thank you very much. You've shown us that structure isn't the enemy of speed. It's the physics that makes sustainable speed possible.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Stephane.
To our listeners, stop running, start building. See you in the next episode.